Good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Cathers. I'm the Executive Director of the Kentucky Arts Council. And on behalf of the Kentucky Arts Council staff and board, I would like to welcome you and thank you for being with us today for the fifth of our six-part series about emergencies, disasters, and the arts. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement that recognizes the unique and enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and their traditional territories. Today, we are on land once occupied by ancient peoples whose history has been lost, but whose legacy remains. The evidence of these ancient people can be seen all over Kentucky through the mounds and artifacts that are left behind. Here in Frankfort, Kentucky, we occupy lands of the Cherokees, the Osage, the Yuki, the Shawnee, the Hopewell culture, and the Adena culture. Today, more than 170 American Indian tribes are represented by their members living and working in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. We honor those who were here and those who are here now and build upon the legacy of stewardship they have for the land into the seventh generation. Now I'll turn it over to KAC's Executive Staff Advisor, Emily Moses, to start our program. Emily? You are still on mute. I'm sorry, Emily.
Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. Thanks, Chris, and good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining us today. The Kentucky Arts Council became involved in work to address a multitude of issues around emergencies and disasters that affect the arts community following the historic and catastrophic long-track tornadoes that left in their path expansive devastation in Western Kentucky on the night of December 10th, 2021. 7 months later, on July 27th and in the days to follow, historic flooding in the Appalachian Mountains of Kentucky caused massive devastation in the region, again with significant repercussions for the arts community. In both instances, arts organizations were destroyed or experienced significant damage to physical structures, archives, collections, and artwork. The lives and livelihoods of hundreds of artists were affected by lost property, homes, studios, lost equipment, supplies, finished work, and works in progress. And notwithstanding, communities that stood proud one day were forever changed the next. Today, we're joined by artists and representatives of arts organizations who experienced these disaster events. We're going to hear from them about the effects of the disasters on their practices and operations, and we're going to take away from their stories the realization that artists and organizations need support, not just directly following a disaster or emergency event, but long-term support and recovery efforts that will help the arts community thrive once again. It is my pleasure to introduce individual artists Lacey Hale from Letcher County and Crystal Jones from Breathitt County, both in Eastern Kentucky, and Justine Riley from Graves County in Western Kentucky. And a little later, we're going to hear from Appleshop's Roger May and the Hindman Settlement School's Melissa Helton, located in Letcher County and Knott County in Eastern Kentucky, respectively. Thanks, everybody, for being here with us today and for your willingness to share your experiences with us. So I'm going to start with Lacey and Crystal in regards to the floods in Eastern Kentucky. Would you just tell us about your experience with the flood? Lacey, if you would like to hop in there first.
Sure. Well, the night that it started raining, I didn't even know it was supposed to rain that night. So the next morning, I mean, it just rained so hard. I remember commenting to my husband, I don't think I've ever heard it rain this hard for this long before. And our power went out maybe about 2 in the morning or something like that. And all I could think about, and then our phone started going off with the flood alert, warning. And all I could think about was my mom, who lived right next to the creek in Knott County. And wondering if she was going to be okay. And the next morning when I finally fell asleep that night, and then the next morning when I got up, it took me, I think, maybe 4 tries to get out of my holler. We lived on a hill, so our house was okay. But I finally got out of the holler that evening at 6:30. Our power was out, our water was off, the cell towers were down. We don't have a landline. There was no way to contact anybody. So I didn't know what was going on anywhere. And I thought maybe it was just localized to our, where I live. And so once I made it out into town, it really became apparent how bad it had been. And then when I actually made it to our store, so my husband and I, he had owned a record store for 8 years in Whitesburg. It was 8 years last June. And I had a screen printing and printmaking studio in the back of his store. And it was very close to the river here in Whitesburg. And the river never crested, I don't think, above like 2 feet. I mean, since I've been alive, like it was never, people would get down in there and wade in it and fish and stuff. And it never in my life occurred to me to think that water would get into our place of business. And so we had about 2 feet of water in our store, and our place sat about 3 feet higher than the locations around us. But a lot of the equipment that I had was sitting in the floor, or like, screen print t-shirts, they were in the floor in boxes. Any screens that I screen printed t-shirts with that I had sitting down, drying down low, that flood water just melted the emulsion off of them. It was just so full of chemicals. I had printed 250 hand-printed 250 greeting cards for Silas House's new book release to go out with that. And I'd sit them the night before, I'd set them down on the floor in a box to be shipped to the next day. I'd just gotten them done and packaged, and they were just scattered throughout the floor. And that was probably one of the most heartbreaking things, because I'd worked so hard on this large order for somebody that I admired, and all of those cards were just, soaked in mud. And, I lost a lot of material. And, but my mom was okay. And, and we immediately jumped into cleaning, and it was, just something I never thought I would ever see in my lifetime.
Yeah, thank you for that so much, for sharing that with us. Crystal, would you hop in and share about your experiences?
Sure, yeah. Well, I was living in Breathitt County. I'm from Breathitt County at the time of the flood. My family is from 476. It was one of the hardest hit areas. I personally was renting a place from a friend, and I was over on an area called Wolverine. So the building that I was staying in did not get flooded, but everything around us, the water was completely up around us. When the water receded, I made my way up Hardshell. It took pretty much all day. There were just houses and cars, and like most of the entirety of 476, everything that had been on a hill or on the riverside was in the road. Basically, as the water went down, it kind of went down into the creek bed with it back that direction. So it took us a while to get up there. We did locate our family. Those that had been hit by the flood, we did manage to start getting stuff out for them and trying to help. And I think for me, the most frustrating part of all that was not being sure just how or where I could help the most for people. So I was like, okay, the only thing I know how to do is run this mouth. So I'm going to get back on my podcast, and I'm going to see how I can use that to help people. So I started doing little news broadcasts. I started trying to go to like the shelters and just get the word out to people, because I knew that even though like there's a lot of cell phone outages and stuff like that, most people would be getting their phones back before anything. So they would have their social media back before anything. And I thought that gives me an opportunity where the TV can't reach them and the radio can't right now. I can maybe. So I tried to focus all my energy on how to help them through what I knew how to do. And it was really heartbreaking. I saw a lot of people. Most of what I do is not per se an art itself. I mean, not to discredit myself, but I try to support and promote other artists. You know, that's the thing behind Muse, is that we want to uplift and promote and get the word out about all these wonderful people that create all this stuff. And so it was hard to see that during the thing, because all these people that I promoted and we were building at that time up to having a festival, which we'll talk about in our next question, but those who had supported and promoted me, it was a real helpless feeling, not knowing how to do anything for them at the moment. And so I focused on trying to help organize like people to help. I reached out to some different sporting goods stores and stuff. We managed to get a couple outdoor places to donate a bunch of sleeping bags and camping equipment, just trying to figure out to do whatever I could with what resources I had, and looking around and trying to assess and figure out where I could take action and where I could help others. Because I was fortunate, like I said, that the place I was staying didn't get personally wet, but everything else did, you know. And when you're in a small town like that, it affects you whether it got you or not. Like, there's no way it won't affect you, because somebody that you know, all of our neighbors, like as the water was going down, we were pulling what we could out of the mud closest to the house, people, things like that. So, but yeah, that was kind of my experience with it in the beginning. And then I went to work with EKU, and I've been very fortunate that they've been real supportive of the recovery and tried to cover it. And so that's kind of what I've been focused on through the recovery, and through that was figuring out how I could use my art to kind of, I don't know, see if I could be helpful or useful in any way. Yeah, but that's sort of been my experience and where we are now with it. And we're still looking at people who are in recovery, still looking at different stories, trying to make sure that this doesn't drop out of the mainstream, that people remain aware that this is still an ongoing process.
There was great coverage on WEKU around the marker of the year. And your podcast also is, tell everybody real quickly what your podcast is.
Oh, it's a Muse in the Mountain, MEWZ, Music News, Muse. And we're on pretty much all platforms. I don't get to put out as many episodes as I'd like to anymore because I'm full time with the other station, but we're still around. We still, we go out and support basically any form of artistry that's local. We try to help people learn how to self-manage, how to start an LLC for themselves. Just in any resource or any piece of knowledge I've got that they could find useful, we try to share that with them. And we're trying to be an advertising business, and that's what we are essentially, in the fact that we try to connect small business with local artists and get a relationship built between the two so they can support one another.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Crystal.
Thank you,
now,
guys.
Justine, if you'll join us and share about your experiences on the night of December 10th, 2021, when the tornado came through Graves County where you live.
Yeah. All right, sure. Let's see. Well, it's been almost a year and a half, but it's still quite clear what that night looks like. The day, Friday, it was Friday, and that day the weather was, December should usually be kind of cold, but the weather all day was kind of warming up, and it was not windy at all. It was just like a very strange day, but we didn't think much about it because the weather can be strange here anyways. And then they actually had been warning us about a potential storm or a big storm coming through, I think even the day before, but you get a lot of those warnings and you don't always take them seriously. So about 9 o'clock that night, we decide we're going to go to bed early. We get in bed, and my mother-in-law calls and says, I think, they say this is, maybe it was more like 8:30. I can't remember what time it was, but it was obviously already dark because it was December. The days are short, and we kind of call back and forth with my mother-in-law, and she pretty much says, you need to get up here and get in the basement. So we wake up our son, which is not something we like to do. And we go up to my in-laws. They live about 2 miles up the road, and wait it out. And then once we get up there, the news is on, and this is something that is serious. And it was kind of, we got there, I guess it was maybe just entering Graves County. So Graves County is like a big upturned rectangle. I think it's the second largest land size county in Kentucky, but it's like a big rectangle turned up, and Mayfield's right in the middle. So I think it was just coming into Mayfield. So then we know this is pretty serious. We get in the basement. They say to put helmets on your head or something like that. We don't have that. So we put coolers on our head. It was like real serious at that point because it had already, it had probably already gone, I don't know, 100 miles or something. It started in Arkansas, went through a little bit of Tennessee, and then had hit Kentucky. So we're down in the basement, and they named the road just up from my in-laws, Dave Miller Road. And so we're thinking we're getting hit. Like we just left our house to go to our in-laws' house to get hit by the tornado. But they had misread it. And my husband, who was able to have a little bit of self-service, said, nope, it just hit our house. So he decides, we weren't serious. We left our animals at home. Which of course, once we were up in the basement, I was freaking out that we had left them up there. But in 2016, we had a tornado hit the side of our house. It was not nearly as bad, but so you kind of think like, oh, this is not going to happen twice in such a short span of time. So I jump in the truck with my husband. We leave our son up at our in-laws, my in-laws. And we come down and everything looks fine. And then we go into the house, and there was rain. It started to rain after the tornado, which is how a lot of even more damage was done, because it ripped off all these roofs, and then it started to rain. So it let all that water in. So even people's houses that weren't could be repaired, the rain damage was really bad. And so the water's already leaking into our kitchen. We have a 2-story house, a little attic upstairs. It's already leaking into our kitchen. So my husband gets up and it's like, oh, we realize now the roof has been damaged. And of course, pulling up, there's just stuff scattered everywhere, which you can see just through the headlights of the truck, right? Because it's dark, you can't really see anything. So we run back to my in-laws, and my father-in-law and my husband got up on our roof for about 2 hours. I don't know. We didn't go to bed until, 3 or 4. And of course you can't sleep because it just somehow it just stirs everything up. You could feel it in the air. The cell phones weren't working because there are a few towers that were damaged or taken down. So they got up on the roof. And luckily we're able to tarp it and patch it so that we had minimal water damage to the house. And they were on the roof. Of course, there were more tornadoes going through. It was super windy still, lightning, raining, the temperature is dropping. And I'm sitting up there in the bathroom trying to help my son go to sleep, but also trying to see if they need help up on the roof, because the bathroom's upstairs and it's a big window. So that's how you get access to the roof. And, just hearing all these weird, metal sounds, of metal creaking, it's how you would hear in a horror movie or something. And so as the lightning is lighting things up, you can see that there's a big woodlot. Mostly it's a field behind our house, but there's a big woods lot there with some of the oldest trees around. I keep looking at the line, there's a river behind us. So the line, you kind of know where the trees are taller and where they're shorter. And I'm realizing that's just gone. Wait a second, those trees are gone. So of course, then when we wake up in the morning, we realize the roof on the tobacco barn has been severely damaged, ripped off. The roof on the stock barn has been ripped off, which was all that metal noise that I heard the night before. The woods lots down are, the shingles and tin. I mean, it's just like a million toddlers come and make a big mess, So that was our experience. A lot of it was strange because you couldn't see it, until you woke up to it the next morning. So, yeah.
Justine, I'm going to ask you the next question, and let's start with you because
Okay.
because it will continue your story. I know from things we've talked about in the past. Tell us how that affected your work and your arts practice, and how things in your practice changed for you following the floods and tornado. You mentioned the trees, and I know that was a very important part of your practice. So could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I started art and ceramics, and I've bounced around a little bit. I do bookbinding, I do writing, I do poetry. And I was working on a new project that I had a show for at the Murray Art Guild, and then also the Lexington Library. And it was collecting old seed pods, kind of like what winter looks like, because winter hits, and then I call them summer skeletons. They're dried and they say they're all winter, and it's really just like the cellulose left over in the plant, and it hasn't decomposed yet. And so I was working on that, and of course now and I was also working on a children's book actually about trees called If I Could Grow Trees. And of course now, because I love trees, and we don't have as many trees in Western Kentucky. There's a lot of farm fields, and just different farmers or the other different things that happen to take trees down. So now there's this tornado that pretty much just knocked down a bunch of trees, the trees behind us, a few trees in our yard. Luckily, most of them are pretty small, so they weren't hit as bad, and we lost several in the tornado before. So right after the tornado, you're just like picking up the pieces. I'm kind of like how you guys mentioned with the flood, it's like cleaning up and checking on your neighbors. We had 2 neighbors that lost their houses. One, I believe they're still rebuilding. The other one they've finished. And you're just checking on the community. My son and I were volunteering at High Point Baptist Church, which was like us, kind of just right on the line of the tornado. I say we weren't hit directly by the tornado, we were scratched by the tornado. And so we were just, you're kind of just sidetracked for a good 6 months, just doing other things, just not even thinking about art, besides trying to take a few notes here and there to kind of remember. But one thing that did, come out of it that wouldn't have, a little bit of good news, I guess you could say, is we're picking up all this tin, and the barns need new roofs. So, I remember standing there, and the roof guy's there, like giving a quote, and he has this book of all these colors of metal, and I'm kind of sitting there thinking, like, why? I don't care like about colors. Like, it just seems not important what, like, because I'm wondering, do I even want to stay here? This is terrifying to see what wind can do to damage where you live and your homes and that kind of stuff. But I said, well, I spent a lot of time in New England as a kid, and they paint a lot of their barns red. So I just said, well, let's put on I chose the red color. And then, so we're picking up all this tin, and as we had been wanting to put a barn quilt on our barn anyhow, and somehow it kind of evolved. We said, well, what if we make a barn quilt to memorialize this tobacco barn, which has survived 2 tornadoes now, or I guess 3. There was one back in the 50s when my father-in-law was growing up down here. His grandfather farmed down here. What if could we make a barn quilt out of tornado tin? So it gave us a direction to kind of bring some order to chaos. So we got metal from our neighbors that lost their house. We got metal actually from the tornado in 2016. Metal from both of our barns here that had to be repaired and replaced. And we made a barn quilt, and that was a good move. That was a good in-between step to be able to move to these other projects that I was working on, because to go straight into them, I really had no inspiration to do that kind of work. It didn't seem important when people didn't have a home, and Mayfield was pretty much not there anymore, at least downtown Mayfield. So that was, it took a different direction and it was delayed.
Right. And I know that, we talked after the tornado, and I talked with several artists after the tornado and after the floods, and that was a common thread of, I don't even know if I want to make work anymore. And I remember
Yes.
that was a thing that you had said occurred to you right after the tornado happened. And I know, Lacey, you have mentioned that also. Would you share with us about the work that has come since the floods, and how your arts practice has been affected and changed following the flood?
Yeah, there was a point right afterward that I did question, just like Justine was saying, that, you see people, you hear stories about the horrible thing, some of my relatives went through trying to survive the floodwaters, and stacks of people's belongings that are just, covered in mud by the side of the road, just every day for months. And it doesn't seem, there was a part of me that was like, I don't know if I'm going to make art anymore. I didn't know if it was possible. I was out of work for 3 months, I think, just trying to get our space down there cleaned out, helping where I could. And finally, there were some articles I was reading and people's comments that were people were saying, like, why didn't these people just move? Why are people still living next to water? Like, why are they living next to creeks that could flood? And that kind of made me want to create a piece of artwork. That kind of lit a spark under me to create a piece that kind of spoke to that and spoke to the resilience and the strength of the people in this area. And just there's no way we could have cleaned our space out down there and come back the way we did without the help of our community. There were people that came in off the street that helped us clean and donated money. It was really unbelievable. And so I just wanted to make a piece of artwork that, spoke to the beauty and the strength and the resilience of the people in this region. And so from there, I'd had those cards, 250 cards I'd printed that got destroyed. I had just printed, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 No Hate in My Holler prints that were going to go out to a store I stocked in Louisville. There was a store I was supposed to be standing stuff to in Roanoke, Virginia. So I had all this stuff together or orders that I was working on that most of the products were just totally destroyed. And I lost several of the screens, like I mentioned earlier. So there were t-shirts and prints that I just couldn't do anymore. And but after I did that piece about the resilience of Eastern Kentucky, and then I got I was awarded a residency through the Kentucky Foundation for Women to go to the Loretto House and do a residency there. And on the way there, I didn't know what I was going to paint. I just knew I needed some time because I'd been working nonstop since the flood, trying to clean, help other people, do what we could. And my husband was like, I can see you getting a little testy, and just you need to, you may need to take a break, just calm down and take a break, because I just been going. And he suggested I apply for something like that. And so that came up, I did, I got it, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And so on the way down there, I actually was thinking about just like I mentioned earlier, these piles of garbage, trucks would come through and take them out. And then the next day there'd be, 10-foot high piles of garbage, right back. For 3 months, this was going on. And I just didn't understand how that much refuse, these were people's belongings. And so that was in my head. And then this was in October. So on the drive to Narragansett, Kentucky, the leaves were changing. And And I just in my head saw this like juxtaposition of these of like piles of garbage, the mountains with the leaves changing. And then right before the flood happened, there was this blue heron that I saw fly up over out of the river and up over the mountains. And it just made such an impression on me. It was so beautiful that that I knew I wanted to do something with it. And so I that was the painting that I did at that residency. And so I think that residency gave me a chance to take some time for myself and to like work through. I mean, I did that piece and I cried a lot through it, and it helped me work through some of the trauma and that I'd witnessed and gone through. And I'm so glad I came back to realizing. I mean, I knew I always realized it, but that art is healing and it was important. And I'm just glad I had the chance to do that and then get back into my regular art practice, because it was, there was just, no energy for a long time to like even think about creating artwork.
And you have a new space now.
Yes, yeah. We've got a new space on the other end of Main Street, so we're not near the river and we're upstairs. So we should be okay now. And it's a beautiful space, and we're really happy. But again, yeah, if the community hadn't helped us out, like I don't know if we would have been able to recover as quickly as we did. So that's, the community. I've always been public art and community murals have always been a part of my art practice, but now I want it to be more than ever just to give back to the people that helped us, so yeah, I'm glad that we got to stay in Whitesburg.
Yeah, thank you. Crystal, I wonder if you might share with us, you had a festival planned during the summer, and that festival had to be postponed. Would you share a little bit about that and where you are now with that project?
Sure. So yeah, we had originally had Festival of the Muse, which was going to be our first gathering of all of our fan base. The idea behind it was to make it as big of an independent artist and resource and networking event as possible. It was going to be free and open to the public. We were scheduled to have that at Douthit Park in Jackson, which is in Breathitt County. It was scheduled for the end of August, and this flood happened about 3 weeks prior to it. It's like a couple of them said when this happened, even though the park had been somewhat cleaned up, the rest of town was still in no shape. As Granny used to say, the house is not in shape for company. So I didn't feel like it would be appropriate, even if we could find a spot. It was just too soon. Too many people were grieving. There were still people who were missing at that time. It was just too soon. So we shifted gears and tried to focus on how we could use what we had to help others at that moment. So I put together a couple last-minute benefit concerts to try to raise money and try to get people to donate items, and that went fairly well. So we did one in the Gorge at Red Point, and then we did another one here in Berea, where I am now. I did end up having to move after the flood, which was kind of sad for me because I was really hoping to build up Muse, because Breathitt County has no, like, it doesn't have any kind of artistic outlets. It doesn't have any sort of galleries or live music venues or anything like that. And the momentum that went into this, the build up to this, everybody was actually very excited. We had over 500 people on our Facebook page saying that they were coming. That was huge. The mayor had called me and be like, I don't even know if we can handle this many. We haven't had this many people in a long time. Like, this is great. And we were really excited about it, and after the flood, I went down to the park and I took a look around, and like I said, I just didn't feel like it was appropriate. So we focused our energy on other things like the benefit concerts and things like that. And I decided that one of the things that I thought was sad was that a lot of people, they're already living in impoverished areas. And doing the work for WEKU and On the Rise, we talked to a lot of people about the mental health and the recovery and that aspect of it and stuff. And a lot of the people who had artistic endeavors or who were creative types, they talked about, I really appreciate people helping us out, but the last thing they're ever going to think to bring me is a box of paint. And I'd really love to paint right now, or I'd really love to play a song right now, and they didn't have anything to play it on. And so I've been working on a project called the Art Box Project, which is I got a couple folks out of Lexington who used to run a magazine to donate me some old news boxes. Actually show you guys, this is, if you can see that, there's one in the corner that I'm working on decorating. And they'll be set around at different places in low income areas, and it'll just be free art supplies for people. That's going to be the project. That's what we're going for. And so I'm trying to, in the aftermath, I've been to a few of these meetings like this with different artists and things, and trying to figure out what people need, because I actually have a background in psychology. That's what I went to school for, in counseling. And I've always thought art was one of the biggest ways of therapy, best ways to use therapy. It's very therapeutic, is what I'm trying to say. So I've tried to figure out how to incorporate what I've known and what I've learned in school with what I'm figuring out about the art community and the resources, and in this recovery, how all this can tie together to help people. And so right now, I am in Berea. As I said, we did have it scheduled to go on. Actually, this coming weekend, it was supposed to happen, but unfortunately, the venue that we had it scheduled for has had some zoning issues with Madison County. So we are again set back. And so we're just working with Kentuckians for the Commonwealth and a couple other groups now. We're just going to see if we can't turn Muse into a shell, and see if we can make it, when it finally does get to happen, and we hope it will soon, that we can make it a very inclusive thing. We can make it very resourceful and use it to become something that helps people heal in this process, and just see if I can take everything I've learned and everything that everybody else has learned, and kind of make an event that is sort of a gathering of people to come and talk about things, and to talk about their art, and basically extend the conversation that we're having here. So I hope that will come to fruition for us. And I did just want to mention, Lacey, that bird, that herring piece, that's amazing. I too have struggled with that, and I can relate to all of you about feeling like you don't want to do this anymore. Like I said, this week, this is the second time I'm having to reschedule this festival, and it hurts the heart. You really put a lot of work and stuff into your art, and then when you don't get to get it out there into the world, you do ask yourself, what was the point of this? But there is a big point to it. I've heard a lot of people say since then, I'm glad that people are back singing, painting, etc., doing their art. It does help us heal. And as far as your herring, Lacey, I just would like to tell you that has always weirdly been my spirit bird. I grew up on 476, and they were always in the creek, and they always seemed to pop up whenever I was having a bad day. And so it's now I won't cry about it. But it was really wonderful to see you, because it just felt so full circle to see my spirit bird by one of my favorite local artists. And I was like, yeah, we can keep doing that. So yeah, so that's it, I guess, on that question, unless you guys have any more questions for me.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Crystal. And we know that that festival will come together at some point for you. I know it will.
He'll get here. Yeah, we will. Thank you.
We're going to turn to our organizations now. Many people across the nation are familiar with the impact the floods had on organizations, especially Apple Shop and the Heinemann Settlement School. Roger and Melissa, will you tell us about the enormity of the impact on your organization and in your community? And Roger, we'll start with you.
Sure. So I just want to acknowledge Crystal and Justine and Lacey, your all's stories and what you've shared. The impact of that is tremendous, and I'm grateful for y'all for what you do in your own right, in your own communities. For Apple Shop, I mean, we like everyone, we didn't know we knew it was raining, and everybody went to bed that evening and was kind of keeping an eye on the rain, or it was keeping folks up. And everybody woke up that morning to, the North Fork of the Kentucky River out of its banks more than anybody could ever remember seeing in Whitesburg. I live over in West Virginia, and I go to the shop one day a week, and I, like 4 days prior to that, I got COVID. So I was just starting to kind of be on the back end of that, and then the flood hit, and I couldn't physically be there to help do anything, which was incredibly frustrating. I'm a doer and a fixer and all that stuff, and not being able to be there was pretty stressful. But we just waited for the water to recede and tried to assess the damage as best we could, and there was just no way to know. I don't think the enormity or the impact of, I think, Lacey, when you said earlier, you didn't know if it was just your holler that was being impacted by it. I don't think anybody got the scale or the scope of it until days later. And when the water came down, we just started going in as quickly as we could to pull things out of the building. But just for those that don't know, our archive warehouse is located closest to the river, and the vault that held our most precious archival materials was in kind of that lowest part of the warehouse. And I'm 6'4", and the water level inside the vault was 6.5 feet. So 80% of our archive materials were directly impacted or damaged by the floodwaters. And like so many other people, we just went right into the work of trying to get everything out. We were fortunate to have a lot of volunteers and a lot of folks that wanted to just show up and help do anything. But we knew that we needed to do that safely. So we were, trying to get proper PPE, and it was hot. Y'all remember how hot it was, and trying to make sure that people stayed hydrated and safe. And I guess I'll pause there and hand it off to Melissa.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. So Hyman Settlement School, we're a historic and cultural nonprofit in Knott County. And we're on the banks of Troublesome Creek. And Troublesome Creek today is about 4 inches deep. That day it was 20 feet. So our immediate concern, we were in the 45th Appalachian Writers Workshop. So we had 60 people on campus, some of them in spaces that had, suddenly had 52 inches of water once the doors burst. Everybody made it out okay, up to higher ground. One of my colleague's wife, she broke her leg, and that was our only physical injury. But about 12 of the writers lost their vehicles. And so the immediate concern was making sure everybody was okay and getting them off campus. And then our executive director, Will Anderson, put out a call, and he said, we don't have power, we don't have water, we can't change the sheets, but if anybody needs a bed, we have housing. And so immediately community members who were displaced showed up, and some of them stayed with us for weeks and weeks. And so we were emergency sheltering for the community, and started feeding 3 meals a day to anybody who showed up. And that's hard to do without gas or electric or potable water. But our volunteers from our writing community and our local community worked miracles. And so we were feeding the community for weeks. And we also became a distribution center, bus loads of cleaning supplies, dog food, diapers, just everything, loaded up our great hall, and people showed up and took what they needed. And, to see somebody show up on a side by side, and they're the only person who could get out of their holler, and they needed supplies for 5 households, so we were doing that. And also we were a hub for other services like mental health counseling. University of Kentucky came down to give hepatitis and tetanus boosters to people who had been in the water. FEMA was here meeting with people. So that was happening in the other room. And then also
the director said that next day, because we have an archive substantially smaller and more hyper focused on us than Apple Shops. But Will said, can you do something to save the archives? I'm not an archivist. I don't know. And so I said, oh my gosh. And thank the universe, a woman I went to high school with worked at the National Archives in DC. So I put in an emergency call to her and said, oh my God, Shannon, what the heck do I do? And she gave me some immediate pointers. And then I sent out a desperate call on the internet saying, oh my God, somebody come help us. And some of the first people who showed up to us were people on their way to Apple Shop, but Apple Shop was still underwater. So they helped us for a day or so before they could make it out to Whitesburg. And so I kind of took on that role, organizing volunteers and experts to come in and try to rescue our archives. And an additional thing going on is that we offer dyslexia and literacy tutoring in school systems that didn't flood. So like Bell County or Harlan County, Leslie County. So we were also, while literally digging ourselves out, trying to feed and house the community, we are also still trying to do our regular work, providing tutoring in schools that were unaffected. So that was kind of like the immediate first several, months of the crisis.
Melissa, you mentioned that you're not an archivist, but I know you had to become specialized overnight, basically, to save collections and archive materials that were so important to the storied history of the Heinlein Settlement School. Can you talk a little bit about how you prioritized that and how you went about working towards salvaging any of your materials and collections?
Yeah, and the problem is that I'm also I don't have an app studies background, so I'm looking at all this stuff, and I didn't know what was the priority. I gave a talk for a conference this winter, and the title of the conference was "We're running out of time and nobody knows anything." Because that's what it was like. And we were just pulling stuff, and me not knowing the significance. Robert Geip was here volunteering, and he saw some Don West pamphlets like literally laying in the gutter. And he's like, do you know what these are? And I was like, no. And thank God he took them and cleaned them and cared for them. And one of our problems in the archive rescue was we didn't have a continuum of care. So we would have somebody come down from Berea College, and Lori Meyer-Steele stayed here for days and days, but then she had to go back. And so then another expert who was maybe a fabric conservator or had a different specialty, and they would take over. And we had this constant influx, especially of volunteers from the Daughters from the American Revolution. We have a strong relationship with the DAR. And it was like reinventing the wheel every day with who happened to be here. And so we've just hired Sarah Insulaco, who is from her people are from Whitesburg, and she was from East Tennessee, but she is going to take over this massive thing, because we still have items in cold storage in Lexington. I mean, and things are still scattered about. We don't know what we had, so we don't know what was missing. We don't know what needs crowdsourced or replaced. And so we're very glad that Sarah has come to join us and to take over this monumental task. And I'm the literary arts director. And so after the archive kind of got paused, everything was frozen or dried, and we were in the process of hiring. We have a publishing imprint called Fireside Industries through the University of Press of Kentucky. And UPK asked me if I would put together an anthology, because you have 60 writers on campus going through this 1,000-year flood. And so that was my main focus in flood related stuff over the winter, was putting together this anthology, which will be due out next summer. And then, of course, when our writers came back for the year anniversary just a couple of weeks ago, some of them, it was their first time back on campus. I'd been here every day. I'd metabolized a lot of that grief, but some of them, it was their first time back. And so trying to think of how to help, the writing community through this as they came back. And I was like, dear God, don't let it rain. And we had a heat wave and it didn't rain. Thank God there was no rain that week. But yeah, so it's been, and we're in these little cubicles in the Great Hall. Like we still don't have office spaces. We still are, there's hammering going on downstairs today. So it's still all just, it's a cliche, but it's a marathon, not a sprint, as you all know.
Thank you. That's super insightful. Roger, I know that there are a lot of people who are extremely interested in the Apple Shop collection. That was one of the questions that we got over and over again in the days and months following. Can you talk to us a little bit about the materials themselves and what happened to them and where they are now, the things that have been able to be saved?
Sure. Let me just commend Melissa and folks at Heinemann for not only just all the work that they did in the community and in their collections, but they did an amazing job of documenting the post-flood cleanup, and like that in and of itself, I think is, as a documentarian, something that I really valued is, and it kind of ties in with what Lacey was saying and Crystal and Justine earlier too, of like, that's still making art in some way, in some small way. And I really wrestled with that because, I was like, how can I possibly pick up a camera? How can I do this? It's just too heavy. There's too much. And, you instinctually continue with that practice of documentation. And so, Melissa, I don't know if anybody's commended you all on that or not, but I certainly noticed it and really appreciated sharing that out on social media and that sort of thing. Emily, though, to your question, first of all, I failed to mention this earlier. We had 27 staff, and there were 2 staff that we couldn't reach for about 24 hours because their house got flooded, and I was just in a full-on panic mode. I had the father of one of the employees call me and say, "Have you heard from my son?" And until you've talked to the parent of somebody who's looking for their kid, I mean, it just hits you in a way that, as if it wasn't real enough already, it just makes it so much more personal. We did account for everybody. Nobody sustained any serious injuries or anything. But as we moved to prioritizing our archival materials, we had a little bit of everything there. It wasn't just films and it wasn't just photographs. There were all types of other ephemera, woodworking, instruments, quilts, home movies, films that Apple Shop filmmakers had made, audio recordings, all of that. So Caroline Rubens, our archivist, did her level best to sort of, as those materials were coming out and we were sort of triaging everything, to put things in different sections. So we had our reel-to-reel audio tapes that were coming out, and we were contacted by a specialist in the field who was just amazing at being able to restore reel-to-reel audio. The same for VHS tapes. I mean, nobody thinks about VHS tapes until you're like, oh my God, that's the only copy of that one particular thing. And so fortunately, there was a VHS tape expert that contacted us, and we have that material with them. And then our film, our documentary films. So we like Heinemann, we have stuff all over the place, and we've sort of relied on the subject matter experts in those respective fields to sort of suspend any further damage to those by cold storage and by treating those media. And we're starting to get some of that back this week on Mountain Talk on WMMT, our radio station. There was a feature on there about some of the audio recordings that have come back, and just knowing that those were being able, that those were able to be saved was just unreal. In the cleanup, while we were sort of getting everything on tables and trying to spread them out, there was this shaft of light that was coming through the gallery window, and I walked over to the table and was looking at all these reel-to-reel audio spools, and it's like the Carter family, from the Carter family fold from the early 1980s and late 1970s, and the stuff that people haven't seen in decades probably, and that's all now fortunately being restored. It's too early yet to know what percentage of those items were total losses. It's sure to say that there was a fair amount of any instruments or quilts or woodworking, those things were completely washed away. But we're hopeful that the remaining assets in the archive can be salvaged.
Well, we're hopeful of that too. And I know that there's a lot of folks who continue to be interested in these processes related to the archives. So that's something we definitely want to keep at the forefront of folks' minds. In your continued response, just like Melissa said, it's the marathon, not the sprint. And we know that you all need long-term support, not just short-term support. So to that end, and this question is for everyone, what's needed for your practice or for your organization right now? And even what's needed in your communities? How can people continue to support and help in your ongoing response efforts? Roger, would you like to start?
Well, I think where we find ourselves now is we're trying to figure out what we can do in our current location, at 91 Madison, where I think we're about 42 feet from the North Fork of the Kentucky River. I mean, we're right on the bank there. We found out in the process of post-flood work that not only are we in the floodplain, but we're in the floodway. And so that adds an extra layer of challenge when it comes to thinking about what the future of Appalshop in that physical space might look like. We know that if we stay at 91 Madison, we're going to have to essentially remove the first floor of our building, which contained our WMMT radio station, roadside theater, our art gallery, elevator, our warehouse, our vault, all of those things. So, we always welcome financial support, for longer term planning. But I think another way that folks can, continue to listen and support WMMT, and continue to support other, local arts organizations in the area.
Let's give some plugs too. Roger, how can people donate to Appalshop if they want to donate?
Our website is appalshop.org. And my communications director is going to fuss at me later because I don't have the exact link, but it may be donate/donate. But if you go to appalshop.org,
find it.
you can find a link there for sure.
Okay, Melissa, let's go to you. And also if you would share too, how people can donate to the settlement school.
Yeah, like Roger was saying, if you go to our website, Heinemann.org, there's a donate button. And if you want to specifically earmark stuff for flood recovery or just a general donation, of course, helps. We had 5 buildings damaged. And so we did have flood insurance, but it was paltry, compared to the damage. Some of our biggest challenges is, we don't have office spaces. The ground floor of the James Still Learning Center, which is our classroom building, all those ground floor classrooms were destroyed. And our ADA compliant housing, the apartments for our disability accessibility, those were destroyed. And so now, as we are repairing or building new housing, a lot of it has to be modified so that we do have ADA compliant housing on campus. So, you know, it's awful to say like money, but money is very helpful in as much physical repairs as we need. Also, if people are interested in helping with the archive recovery, as Sarah, our new archivist, is getting things set up, she will have a rotating schedule of volunteer days. If people want to come out to Knott County and actually help, boots on the ground, clean and dry these photographs and quilts or whatever it is that we're doing. If you want to help in that way, that those opportunities will be opening up in the next couple months, and just watch our social media for a call for volunteers.
That's great information. I know there are a lot of people out there who are still interested in volunteering. So thank you for sharing that. Justine, let me go to you. What kinds of things are still needed in your arts practice? Now, I'll also point out too that Justine's husband is also an artist. So what kind of things do you all find yourself still needing, or what do you see in your community, in the arts community there, that's still in need?
So my husband and I are both extremely grateful. We were able to get a surf grant, and then we also got a grant from the Kentucky Arts Council to continue to pursue some of the barn quilts, the barn quilt idea out of Tornado 10. So we actually, about in May, we went out in Mayfield and just in ditches on the side of abandoned lots or the railroad, collected tin, knocked on a few doors and asked if we could get tin. So we're working on that. So, you know, we don't, as individual artists, I don't feel we need anything except, I mean, just, you know, Mayfield also their flood was not like Eastern Kentucky, you know, it's not mountainy here, it's pretty hilly. So, but, you know, we've had continued flooding and other things and tornadoes, a lot of tornado warnings last winter as well. So it just seems like that's the new normal, that, you know, there's going to be tornadoes and flooding. I mean, our yard has flooded 5 times this year. That was never normal. So it's not it's just, I don't know, maybe talking to other artists is a great way, and understanding like, oh, it's nice to hear, you know, Lacey and Crystal and say like they too is like, for a while you're like, I don't want to make art, or I don't know how I could do that, because, and then later you make art about it, which is good. But that continued inspiration and other artists would be where you would do that a lot of times, I feel, and how Crystal was saying that art can be therapy, which we all know. But Mayfield, the ice house, so the Mayfield Art Guild was completely destroyed by the tornado. And so they're in Regions Bank. And then last summer, I taught classes at the Graves County Extension Office. They let them use some space there, but they're in between spaces, and none of them are like nice, inspiring spaces. But, you know, Mayfield does need a place for artists and creatives and writers to gather. And I haven't heard the latest on their location. At one point their location was in a flood zone. So the location is really important too, because Mayfield does definitely have a lot of poverty, and I would love to see a great location and a place that people want to go and meet their neighbors and make art. So that would be, in my opinion, the thing that Mayfield needs the most.
Thanks, Justine. We continue to have conversations with the Ice House Gallery. For anyone who doesn't know, the Ice House Gallery is a regional it had a space, and it was a regional gallery and a regional organization. It was very important to the arts ecosystem in Western Kentucky. And there were more than 80 artists who were represented in the gallery at the time who lost work. And that it also had its largest annual show up at that time. And there were over 100 artists who also lost work in that. And as Justine said, the building itself was a complete loss. So that's great to point out that the Ice House, Justine, because I know they are in need of support. Lacey, I'm gonna come to you. I accidentally muted myself. I'm going to come to you. If you could answer the same question, what is it that you need? And if you feel maybe that there aren't any personal needs, though I would say that there probably are still as an artist, what does the community need? What needs do you see?
Well, first I want to just real quick say thank you to Crystal for the kind words about the blue heron piece. And just to say that when I was looking up the meaning of a blue heron, you know, strength and resilience were actually in the list of that. And I thought that was really cool. And that was after I did the painting. I was just curious and I decided to look up the animal just to see what meanings were equated with it. But anyway, the needs that I have, you know, I also received the SURF grant. I received the grant through the Kentucky Arts Council, and those have helped immensely. Like I said, there are people from the community that donated to us. You know, my husband and I both being self-employed and being out of work for 3 months, that was really difficult. But with all the financial help that we've received, thankfully, I've been very blessed to continue to be able to work after the flood. So I've gotten a lot of work. I've been staying very busy. The one thing I need is I haven't had a break since that retreat that I took in October. And I feel like I can't hardly keep up sometimes. And I feel like I can't hardly let myself take a break at times. You know, anybody that's creative and works for themselves, I think it's hard to know when you can step back and take a vacation or feel like you have the ability to do that. And the flood and everything that we went through and just trying to get back up on our feet, I think that just compounded that feeling. But other than that, I mean, I think we're at a pretty good place, and I don't know that we need that much. But you know, the community, the housing was already an issue here, and it's even more so now. I know there's a couple groups that have been working to build homes for the people that lost their houses in the flood. Homes Incorporated and the Housing Development Alliance are two that I know personally. But there's always going to be needs. You know, I saw a friend of mine on Facebook was asking for people who had lost their homes in the flood. Their kids started going to school and they needed clothes because they have not been able to recover. And you know, their little girl was going to kindergarten and they didn't have anything to dress her in for school. So there are still needs as far as those concerns. So that's the majority of what I see. Like I said, I think we're back to thankfully being pretty good and on our feet. So.
Now, when it comes to making donations of things like clothing or supplies, which I know are still needed, how can people help in those ways? Is there someone they can contact? Is there an organization that you're aware of locally that is still handling those kinds of things?
The ones that I knew locally are not anymore. I don't know right off. Melissa, did you have?
Yeah, one thing that I could recommend is if you look at East Kentucky Mutual Aid on their social media, they will post when there's a need, or if somebody's like, hey, I've got a school supply giveaway. It's if you just look them up on Facebook and say, we're going to be at this church giving away school supplies in the community. They've got a big base. And so the word can get out. So that's the East Kentucky Mutual Aid.
Thank you, Melissa. I totally forgot about them. And they
Thank you.
helped
That's
us
great.
as well after the flood. So yeah, that's a great point.
That's great. And Lacey and Justine, you both mentioned SURF, and for those who might not know, that's the Craft Emergency Relief Fund, which is a great nonprofit organization that responds to disasters to help individual artists recover from their losses. So thanks for mentioning, that's a great resource, Crystal, will you answer the same question? How can people continue to support and help in ongoing response, and what is needed for your practice?
Yeah, thank you. So our practice right now, what I'm going to continue on with is to be an advocate and a promoter of local artists, independent artists of all different genres and backgrounds. And so in that sense, what we could always use is for people to like and follow our social media page, Muse in the Mountains on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We do have a Patreon. It's at patreon.com/Muse in the Mountains. And you can donate there if you want. It's like $5 or $10 a month, and all that goes into our Art Box project, where we'll be putting art materials and things like that out for people. We hope to see that hopefully in November. I'm trying to plan like a Friendsgiving for artists and things in this community. And we hope to debut the first couple art boxes at that time. And I'm going to take the first few out to Breathitt County and Knott County, the places that were flooded in East Kentucky, and try to get some out to West Kentucky and all these different places. It's nice to know you guys are also keeping up on what people need, because that gives me a good idea of where I can, distribute what information and what materials and so forth that I come across. We'd also Muse, of course, and I do work for WEKU and PR. So if you guys have a moment when you're finished, if you want to shoot me an email at amuseinthemountains@gmail.com, I'd be happy to share any of this information. I can put that on my page and on WEKU too about your organization, how people can donate, because like you said, they are still interested, and I would love to share that information for you guys on those platforms. And of course, we will be working toward getting the festival up and going. We do hope to do that. And we could always use, if you have any businesses, any small businesses or large, that would like to sponsor and support our events, because they're always free to the public. And we are tax deductible because we're an advertising agency. So that's a bonus for them. But yeah, we would love to know about those businesses and them to know about us, and that our mission is to take small business and small artists and connect the two so they can support one another in the community in a fruitful way. And as far as needs, I have to agree with Justine. It would be wonderful to have some spaces in some of these places that have been affected that was just devoted to creation and art and community and safe spaces where people can come and talk and use this as a therapeutic space and a way to share with one another. So that would be a wonderful idea. I agree with that. I did receive a couple grants as well from the Arts Council and the Art Foundation, and we're really appreciative of that. We've used that to move ourselves to Berea to get established here. We're putting some of that into what's going to happen with the festival, into the Art Box projects as well, getting those up and getting that off the ground and running and delivered everywhere. But yeah, so if you wanted to help support us, you can do that through the Patreon, or you can also just send us your information. We love to stay in contact with you guys. And I have a news meeting on Mondays. So over the weekend, if anything comes up at any time with any of your organizations or even your personal artistry and you'd like to share that, I can share, I have a couple of platforms that I have access to. I'd be happy to pass that information along for everybody so that we can all make sure that the communication stays open. And like I said, it's very important that people understand that we're going to be a long time in recovery and we'll continue to have needs in the future. And we want to keep that on people's minds so they do know there is still places they can volunteer and things like that. So just any information that any of you all have, always please send it to me. I'll do my best to share that for you and help get the word out about what's going on.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And that's a great place for us to pause for the day. I want to thank Lacey, Justine, Melissa, Roger, and Crystal for joining us today. It's so important to share these stories and to hear these stories as we try to move forward the needle across the nation to get more support and especially more funding for artists and organizations following disasters. As many of you know, and some of you may not know, there is no national mechanism that responds directly to the arts in times like these. And so that's one thing that we want to advocate for. And that's one thing that we hope that our visitors to our session today will be able to advocate for in learning about these personal experiences and being able to share information forward that might make a difference to increase the support to the arts community overall in Kentucky and all over the country as we see more and more and more of these disasters occur. And we know, as predicted, that they will continue to occur in the future. So we're hopeful that the series that we have done is going to be able to share out great information and also be able, like I said, to move the needle forward there. I want to thank everyone for coming today, and thank you especially to our guests. We appreciate you. Our next session will be hosted by the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies, and that will be in September, and the information is on our website if you would like to register for that. We hope to see you there. Thank you again for coming, and have a great day.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, everyone.